Hello, everybody. Good morning, good evening, or good night. My name is Clifford Brooks, and today on Noetic with Luke Johnson, we're going to be talking about William Carlos Williams again. He is one of those that I keep preaching about or teaching about, depending on your perspective, that came at poetry from a new way, not to fix what was not broken, but to reinvent for the purposes of accessibility. William Carlos Williams was a Puerto Rican American citizen who, along with Ezra Pound, started what began as the movement called more of an imaginism or an imaginistic stance on poetry. But William Carlos Williams kind of took it to the extent of objection, like objectionism, and the fact that you don't objectify something in its pure sense that we see in government or society or what we're warned against, but in the sense that you make everything that you see around you as easy as it is. A tree exists for itself. The grass exists for itself. The world exists to not inhabit mankind or be nice to mankind, but for itself. It's not a cold or calculating way to see poetry. It's really to see language in its most clearest sense. And then in the idea that we are not out as poets to convince a world that an idea is real or that something is important or that something should be paid attention to. We describe in a very real sense, no matter what school of learning you come from, poets write from a objectionism stance, that we stand back from something, that we study something, not in judgment, but we stand far enough back that we can see it with a clarity that perhaps others lack, because our human nature is to run into the middle of drama, to become, whether we want it or not, a part of the trouble. And it's much more of a safe route. And it's really a yoke that's been placed upon artists that we are the ones that look towards that emotional high, no matter where it comes from. But I find that false. And I'm not, again, trying to convince anybody of anything that's not the truth. But any artist that has looked at the world and left a lasting impression has, one, typically lived beyond the age of 35, that has typically maintained a lifestyle outside of their art and a vocation that is not vastly different, but feeds their intellectual needs at the time. And there are people that are honestly, when you hear it, the most like you and me. They are not those that go out in search of drug addiction, that go out in search of this chaos that we associate so much with artists in general. William Carlos Williams was an extremely forward, direct, with class and couth rule breaker, but always understood that language in itself had a parameter, and he never pushed that. I've touched on him before, and he's one of those that I hold up in my top 5 poets, up there with Rilke, Carl Sandburg, Whitman, and Langston Hughes, as those poets that talk to you in a way that seems so direct that as you read that poem, as you get older, you see more and more in it than you did the last time you read it. And Shakespeare is a great deal like that. And we'll touch base maybe next week on that. With Luke Johnson and I talked about earlier that all the world is a stage and we're all players upon it. But that's not what we're here for today. We are here today for some William Carlos Williams. And I'm going to read that for you now. We're going to read the poem, The Red Wheelbarrow, by William Carlos Williams. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow, glazed with rainwater, beside the white chickens. Many of us would stop right there and say, okay, what else is up? What's going on? Give us more details. That's the whole of it. The red wheelbarrow. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow, glazed with rainwater, beside the white chickens. William Carlos Williams did away with many conventions of his day, really, that were built as the foundations of poetry up until his time. He threw out punctuation, except for the end of the poem. He threw out any kind of capitalization, but it wasn't to be trendy. He never mentions the word I, or me, or my. The pronouns are left out other than anything that the reader would read into it. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow, glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. This removes William Carlos Williams from the poem and puts you, the reader, front and center. He breaks this into 4 stanzas of 2 lines each, and they're very, very direct. The second line in every case is only 1 word. So much depends upon, stops. So much depends upon what? A red wheelbarrow. Many would see that as a naive way to look at the world, but as we grow older, again, think about it. If end times came and all was wiped clean, how handy would a red wheelbarrow be? Remove the adjective red and wheelbarrow. How useful, very useful, as it is today. Glazed with rainwater. Put back in the text at the time the poet who is said to have written this in the time it took to read it, which is not to say that then writing a poem is easy, but that when that thing strikes you, you write it down, you don't question it. But you do, like Tom Waits said one time in traffic while he was driving along and the muse was striking him, he said, oh my God, if I don't write this down, it's all going to go sideways. I'm going to forget it. And then he thought, you know what? I'm the one transcribing this thing. And then looked up to the muses, as it were, and said, you know what? You can wait. I'm in the car right now. And if you were really divine, you would see that. It kind of feeds back into this, is that this poem by William Carlos Williams, The Red Wheelbarrow, has a very divine feeling, in that it strips the life down, what we think of as divine, or as I do, as those things most necessary to life. Those things that make life most, not easy, but efficient. And moving heavy objects from one side of the farm to the other with a wheelbarrow is a hell of a lot easier than doing it with just your hands, one load at a time. William Carlos Williams never titled this poem when it first premiered. That was happened later. He left it untitled, which I think William Carlos later, he really came back later and named it, I think, to remove some of the mystery, because without the title, we wouldn't have the underpinnings, or at least a point of view, as it were, or a Rosetta Stone to translate the rest of the poem. If the idea is too big for a title, I think objectively that the poem needs to be rethought, because the title, it really gives the reader a compass, as it were, to read the map, the key. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow, glazed with rainwater. Now, if it's glazed with rainwater, every one of these words is accessible. We know it. I don't care how little English you speak or how much, you know these words. Glazed with rainwater means that it's not just been sitting there like dew. It's been shown with it. It's been dumped on it. It has been rained upon recently. This person, and I've read reviews of this and analysis of this poem, and I have to agree with those who see this as the poet looking out, removing himself from the image of a boring day, that you would wish for anything to be outside, but you can't. The rain has just passed. Even in each word, we feel like it is a raindrop on a tin roof. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow, glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. Even in its design, even though it breaks all the rules, it still, at least in my mind, leaves a pattern of dripping water from a day almost spent, maybe from 3 days of straight rain, where the youthfulness of us wants to get outside so bad. Whether that's literal, to work the farm, to get that wheelbarrow, those white chickens need to be fed. We need to do something with this farm now. It's to finally stop raining. But anybody who's worked for lawn service or owns property, you can't cut grass as soon as it stops raining. You have to wait. You have to wait till it dries off enough, or you're sitting there pulling out clogs of grass, one fist after the other, having stopped, taking 3 times as long. But if you're any kind of outdoors person, the idea of being stuck inside, period, drives you crazy. You want to be outside where it matters, outside where you do real things. And I think William Carlos Williams made, in his own lifetime, poetry a real thing in the way he would describe things. He is one of those poets, for people who think they're not poetry readers, who is in my top 3. William Carlos Williams really transcends many things in the fact that he doesn't write in prose and spoon feeds you, but he writes poetry in a way that takes life and its experience and relies upon your knowledge and your love of that object to make sense of it yourself, but not without a little bit of help. And to me, that's what poets who last do. The book that this poem first premiered in was called Spring and All. And as he did, like I said before, really work with some British powerhouses as far as the Imaginist movement, he, again, like many Americans, want to make American language count and the way we do things. So it's not to cut his nose off and spite his face. He stayed friends with many of these people his entire life. He really stood back and said, you know what, I'm not just going to, I'm going to call it objectionism, not just to be trite or because I had a problem with somebody, but he really did. If you go back and read where Ezra Pound went from his extrapolation of it, it's to a very vague and useless place, in my opinion. William Carlos Williams always made his bigger, deep points and underpinnings lie and rely on us as human beings. And to us, we tend to find that more palpable, more romantic, more attractive, but we typically find it in songs today and not poetry. And I think it's time we return to that. But to read the book in Spring and All would give you that book, and William Carlos Williams' career, in my opinion, really galvanizes his ability to not change the rules for no reason, but make them fit his voice, because what he has to say is important. But he still pays respects to those before him that made his work matter in the first place. You always want to take what your father or your mentor or your contemporary or the one that you idolize gave you to take beyond that point. You always do. Or you live a life swallowed by misery. And it's not to lay down physics that challenges Newton. It's not to put Einstein down and say, no, I've got it right, he doesn't. It's to write something for mankind, whether it be an essay, whether it be a painting. It doesn't have to be in words and music, and something that makes humanity last, make them think about things that matter. And I think William Carlos Williams, with the poem The Red Wheelbarrow, did just that. It made us see what were boring items. And because we want to understand this language so much, because we've taken the time to read this poem and love this poet so much, we want to know why he thought so much of a red wheelbarrow. I'll read it one last time. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow, glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. A poem doesn't have to be too long or too short. It stands for exactly what it is, for the purpose of the one who is speaking, in hopes that the one who is listening or reading will pick it up as well. And always, it's an honor to be here with you, with Luke Johnson with Noetic, and I look forward to next week when we take another poem. Thank you.